Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something vast, deeper than myth, older than memory, and wetter than your dreams last Tuesday. You're standing at the edge of a flooded world. Your feet sink into a muddy ridge that used to be a hilltop. A soft mist coils around your ankles like it's trying to remember something from long before you were born. The sky is low and heavy with salt gray clouds, but there's no rain. Not yet. The silence isn't peaceful. It's waiting. Listening. Behind you, buried under centuries of sediment and denial, is a lost city no one talks about anymore. And in front of you, an ocean that wasn't always there. The wind carries a smell, briny, electric, like a storm that never came. You take a breath. The air feels ancient, like it hasn't moved since before the first brick was laid in Babylon. Let's be honest, you probably wouldn't make it past the second trapdoor. This story, it's full of twists, half-truths, forbidden questions, and civilizations that might have flown before they fell. Some scholars say it's all allegory. Others aren't so sure. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment, where in the world are you listening from right now, and what time is it? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You kneel down, fingers brushing the earth. It's damp. Not from a recent rain, but from memory. Like the ground itself hasn't forgotten the day the sky fell. Every culture has a flood myth. The Bible's Noah. The Epic of Gilgamesh. Manu in the Vedas. The stories differ in detail but echo the same scream: the world drowned, and only a handful survived. But why? And more importantly, what was lost? A few centuries ago, people dismissed flood stories as primitive allegory. Now, not so fast. Geologists have found thick sediment layers between ancient habitation zones, entire cities swallowed and fossilized in silt. A global event. A reset button. Maybe more than one. Historians still debate whether these myths are connected or coincidental. But you feel it, somewhere between your ribs and your spine, that they aren't just stories. They're warnings. You walk along the ancient ridge. What used to be high ground is now shoreline. On the horizon, the sea shimmers like a secret. Beneath its surface lie ruins, temples, roads, statues, things with sharp angles and smoother stories. Archaeologists call them natural formations. You raise an eyebrow. Sure. And the Mona Lisa was just a happy coffee stain. Some researchers believe that the Great Flood didn't just wipe away wickedness. It buried complexity. Cities that understood the stars better than we do. Builders who moved stones we still can't explain. Languages that bent sound into shape. No one can quite explain why evidence of advanced pre-flood architecture turns up where it shouldn't, in strata too old, in places too remote. But it does. Off the coast of India. Beneath the Black Sea. At the bottom of Lake Van. And then there's the silence. The archaeological shrug. You feel a chill, not from the wind, but from the implications. If humanity built great things before, and then forgot them, what else have we buried? A heron calls in the distance. You glance toward it, and catch something in the sand. A shard. Not ceramic. Not metal. Not anything you've ever seen. You dig. Carefully. Slowly. And that's when the ground shifts, like something beneath it just turned over. You freeze. The water ripples, and the wind dies. You're not alone here. Not entirely. Because this isn't just the story of a flood. It's the story of a memory trying to surface. Of a civilization erased, but not quite dead. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it whisper through the waves. You step back from the shifting earth, pulse steady but your breath catching ever so slightly. There's something about standing on ground that remembers drowning. A few centuries ago, this ridge might have been bustling, market stalls, songs, fires crackling under starless skies. Now, just wet silence and the echo of things unsaid. You walk again, this time tracing the high water lines carved into what little remains of stone. Lines like scars, measuring disaster. The waves didn't just visit this place, they claimed it. Then, tucked beneath the roots of a wind-twisted tree, you find something brittle and rolled tight. A piece of animal hide, maybe. Or something older. You hesitate, then open it. It's a map. But not of this coastline. Not of any coastline you've ever seen. The lines curve in ways that feel off, like the earth was drawn before it settled into shape. Continents too close. Ice shelves missing. And right where Antarctica should be. Forest. Rivers. Cities. Yes, tiny symbols, placed with absurd precision. Historians still debate whether ancient peoples could sail far enough to chart the globe. But there it is, etched in ink older than your country's constitution. A world as it once was, or as someone remembered it being. You've heard whispers about these kinds of maps before. The Pyri Reis. The Orans Fine. Cartographic oddities that seem to suggest humans, or something human-like, mapped Earth before the last ice age. Before our timeline began. Some researchers believe these maps are copies of copies, drawn from older, now lost originals. Others dismiss them as fantasy, mistakes, or coincidences. But even trained geologists have gasped at how accurately they depict coastlines we only confirmed with satellites. Like West Antarctica's subglacial profile. Or the exact shape of South America, drawn centuries before we supposedly circumnavigated it. You turn the hide map over. Scrawled along the edge, almost too faded to read, is a symbol, 3 waves above a downward-facing triangle. You've seen it before. It was carved into the stone basin back on the ridge. Now it's on this map. And later, you'll notice it again, in ruins, in reliefs, and once, in a dream. You stare out toward the sea. The tide's coming in, slow and deliberate. It doesn't crash. It creeps. Because the ocean has all the time in the world. It remembers. You think about what a map truly is. Not just a guide, but a story, drawn in the language of survival. You wonder how many stories were drowned. Not just in water, but in silence. Let's be honest, if someone gave you that map in 1521, you'd be burned for witchcraft. You wonder who last held this piece of hide. And what they were running from. Because someone was trying to preserve something. To whisper across centuries to someone who might understand. And here you are. Standing on forgotten land, holding forbidden knowledge. You squint toward the horizon, the light hitting just right, and suddenly, you see them. Rectangular shadows beneath the water. Geometry too perfect to be coral. Columns. Paths grids. Some say these underwater ruins are tricks of light. Others, like the submerged Yonaguni monument near Japan, defy easy dismissal. Staircases, terraces, straight angles beneath 20 meters of sea. Natural rock formations, they say. Sure. And yet, the grooves align with cardinal directions. The proportions mirror sacred geometry. And locals tell stories of a great city swallowed by the angry sea after its people reached too far. You breathe deeply. The salt stings your lungs. Or maybe it's all. Because if these maps are real, then someone knew the world before the water came. And if they knew it, they might have tried to save it. Or rebuild it. You trace your fingers along the triangle and wave sigil again. A flood warning. A civilization marker. Or just the ancient equivalent of, you are here. You tuck the map away, suddenly aware of how quiet everything's become. No birds. No insects. Just the slow lap of water against memory. The tide reaches your boots. And you swear, for just a moment, you see a staircase disappear beneath the surf. You don't follow. Not yet. But you will. Because the flood didn't just erase cities. It erased context. And tonight, you're going to find it again. You follow the shoreline as the last of the sun melts behind the ocean, casting gold across a waterline that has never obeyed maps. The air is cooler now, still thick with salt, but carrying something else. The scent of stone. Not wet rock. Not driftwood. But old, worked, deliberate stone. You stop. Ahead, half submerged in tide and time, are blocks. Not boulders, blocks. Rectangular, sharp-edged, sunken just deep enough that the waves can disguise their symmetry. You wade in, water swirling at your knees, then thighs. The sea resists, as if embarrassed. As if trying to hide what it's failed to fully erase. You reach out and touch the surface of one. Cold. Smooth. It hums beneath your fingers, not with noise, but with memory. Like it knows you shouldn't be here. Or maybe, like it's been waiting. Historians still debate whether the structures beneath Lake Titicaca, high in the Andes, are natural formations or the remains of a forgotten people. Divers speak of roads, temple floors, and massive platforms carved from andesite. The lake, now sitting at over 12,000 feet above sea level, wasn't always a lake. And it likely wasn't always this high. Some researchers believe the Andes themselves rose rapidly after a tectonic upheaval, burying entire cities in water and altitude. Others propose the lake itself was created by floodwaters, trapped as the world rebalanced. Either way, something built these stones. And whatever it was, it worked with tools we don't talk about in school. The blocks beneath your hand feel suspiciously like those at Pumapunku, another site not far from here. Stones cut so precisely they fit together without mortar, with interlocking angles and internal grooves too complex for Bronze Age tech. And here's the thing. Some of the Pumapunku stones weigh over 100 tons. The wheel supposedly hadn't reached this part of the world when these were cut. Let that roll around your mind for a moment. You lean closer. Tiny indentations dot the stone's edge, not chisel marks, but something finer. Uniform. Like tool paths. Maybe diamond-tipped. Laser-precise. You laugh softly at the thought. That's not supposed to be possible. Yet here it is. You walk the perimeter, slowly, carefully. More stones reveal themselves, stair steps, corner joints, carved basins. All silent. All submerged. Local legends speak of an ancient race, older than the Inca, who came down from the stars, or up from beneath the earth, and taught the first humans. They could speak to mountains, and float rocks like feathers. When the water came, they vanished. Or returned to wherever they came from. You're not saying they were aliens. But if they weren't, they were something else. And if these structures really are pre-flood, as some alternative chronologies suggest, then they didn't just endure the deluge. They anticipated it. Braced for it. Left messages for anyone who might crawl out of the mud and remember how to look. You sit on one of the higher stones, legs dangling in the water. The sky overhead has deepened to velvet. Stars blink into place. You wonder how long this city, or whatever's left of it, has waited for starlight again. There's something deeply wrong with our timeline. You felt it, haven't you? That creeping suspicion that history isn't a straight line, but a spiral, one we've walked before. Some researchers believe, quietly, cautiously, that these structures represent a lost phase of human civilization. One that understood acoustics, magnetism, and celestial alignment in ways that feel backward. Primitive cultures shouldn't have known these things. But what if they weren't primitive? What if we are? A fish leaps in the distance, splashing the silence into ripples. You watch them fan outward, overlapping, echoing. The surface forgets quickly. But below remembers. You rise again, brushing water from your hands. The sigil from the map, 3 waves and a triangle, appears again, faintly etched on a slab. Coincidence? Pattern recognition? Or a symbol passed from coast to coast, city to city, before they all sank? You look back toward the shore. The tide has receded just enough. There's something more visible now, beyond the stones. A path. Leading inward. Leading down. Because the flood didn't just bury cities. It buried stories. And you're here to listen. You follow the path. It curves with intention, not the erratic wandering of nature, but the steady flow of design. Each stone underfoot is a slab, beveled and placed with maddening precision. The joints between them are so tight you could barely slide a thought through, let alone a blade. You walk carefully, eyes adjusting to the growing twilight. The air changes too, heavier, cooler, laced with something iron-like, almost electrical. Like walking through the breath of something long asleep. Somewhere beneath you, the world remembers a time before stories were carved into tablets. Before men with torches chased shadows out of caves. Before even language, maybe. The Great Flood, as told in most traditions, was an ending. But you've begun to suspect it was a reset. A reboot. And maybe, not the first. Historians still debate whether the Sumerian flood narrative, older than Genesis by centuries, is the true origin of the Noah story. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim is warned by the gods to build an ark before a divine deluge wipes out mankind. He does. And he survives. It sounds familiar. Too familiar. But what most people don't know is this: there are dozens of flood stories like that. Dozens. From India's Satapatha Brahmana, where Manu builds a boat after being warned by a talking fish. From Mesoamerican tales where the world is drowned and reborn, over and over again. From Aboriginal stories of the great water swallowing the land, leaving only sky people behind. You pause. What if they're not just similar because of shared human imagination? What if they're similar because they're true? The path deepens. Not physically, but perceptually. You feel like you're walking into memory. Not yours. Humanity's. To your left, half buried under moss and sediment, is a standing stone. Flat-faced, tilted. You brush the surface, and see it. Not writing, exactly. Not any language you know. But symbols. Stars. Spirals. An eye, stylized and looking upward. Below it, the triangle and wave sigil again. It's everywhere, once you begin noticing. On corner blocks, etched faintly into steps, even scratched into the walls of caves and caverns across continents. Some researchers believe it might be a kind of ancient civilizational glyph, a lost world's version of a flag. Others think it could be a reference to alignment, water above, knowledge below. Initiation through immersion. Or maybe it's just their way of saying, we were here. We survived. You can too. You step over a large, flat slab. There's a slight vibration as your foot lands, as though something deep beneath the stone feels your weight. You freeze. Then the air shifts again. And for the first time tonight, you hear it. Not wind. Not ocean. A sound. Faint. Hollow. Rhythmic. Like breathing. Or a heartbeat. Somewhere far below. You keep walking. It's said that under the Black Sea lie ruins, older than the sea itself. Structures, tools, remnants of hearths, all flooded when glacial melt triggered the Bosphorus breach and turned a once freshwater lake into an inland sea. The event, believed to have happened around 7,600 years ago, was sudden, catastrophic, and global in impact. Some believe this was the real Great Flood. Others argue it was just one of many. Because here's the quiet horror no one talks about. Floods are cyclical. They don't just happen once. They wait. They build. They come back. The path opens into what looks like a courtyard, only half of it is visible. The rest slopes down into silt and shadow. Four large columns rise from the muck. Each one etched with geometric reliefs that shimmer slightly when touched by moonlight. You walk between them. You don't know why. You just do. In the center, a basin. Empty now, but carved with channels meant to move water deliberately, not randomly. A sacred engineering. Like the stepwells of India, designed not just to store water, but to honor it. You run your hand over the basin's rim. Another sigil. This one different. A wave. But inverted. Upside down. You blink. And you realize, it's not just a symbol. It's a warning. Because if the Great Flood came once, it could come again. And this time, we may not get a second reset. You look up at the stars. The same stars those ancient builders watched, maybe even worshipped. Maybe they weren't trying to map the heavens. Maybe they were looking for when it would happen again. And maybe now, so are you. You sit at the basin's edge, trying to ignore the way the stone still feels wet despite the lack of rain. It isn't waterlogged, it's holding on, like a memory that refuses to fade. You breathe in. There's a stillness here that isn't peaceful. It's the kind of silence that follows something big. A silence you might find in the moments after a cathedral collapses. Or a civilization. Behind you, the waves sigh again. As if to say, we warned you. You think back to the stories, the pre-biblical, barely whispered tales that don't make it into Sunday school or polite archaeological conversation. Before the Great Flood, there were beings who moved among men. That's not you making things up. It's in the oldest Sumerian tablets, where the Apkallu, part man, part divine, taught humans everything from math to metallurgy. In the Book of Enoch, they're called Watchers. In Mesoamerican lore, they are feathered serpents descending from stars. Whatever their names, the message is the same: advanced knowledge was gifted, or stolen. Civilization blossomed. And then the water came. Some researchers believe this wasn't just divine punishment. It was a controlled demolition. You trace the grooves in the basin. They connect in strange ways. Not random. Not decorative. A system. Maybe for channeling water, yes, but perhaps also something else. Vibration. Sound. You remember the story of Aramu Muru's gate in Peru, a door carved into the mountain face, leading nowhere. Locals say if you place your forehead at the center and hum the right tone, you'll vanish. Not die. Just disappear. No one can quite explain why these gate structures are scattered all over the globe, often at high altitudes, far from any supposed population centers. They're not defensive. They're not symbolic. Maybe they're remnants of a civilization that used energy differently. You wonder if these people didn't just survive the flood, but caused it. Let's be honest, we've done it before. Terraforming. Nuclear testing. Hydroelectric disasters. We know how to play with water. Why not them? Some say the flood was triggered by celestial shifts, planetary alignments that destabilized climates and polar regions. Others propose an asteroid impact, or a rapid ice melt caused by solar flares. All valid. All possible. But what if they knew it was coming? What if they made sure it happened? You glance around the stone courtyard. There's a kind of symmetry to it that starts to unfold in your mind. The basin is the center. The columns are positioned like points on a compass. The engravings, when viewed from above, almost form a circuit. No one's written this down. But you're seeing it. Or remembering it. What if they tried to harness energy, not through combustion, but resonance? The way a perfectly struck note can shatter glass. The way monks can levitate stones with chance, according to old Tibetan stories. And what if one day, the note was wrong? And it all came down. You stand, suddenly aware that you're being watched. Not by eyes. By expectation. The stone beneath you vibrates again, just for a second. Like it's asking, do you understand yet? And the truth is, not quite. But you're close. You step beyond the basin, deeper into the structure. That's when you notice it, etched along the wall at waist height. A line of script. Faded but not gone. Not in any language you know. But a pattern repeats, an open eye, a spiral, and the inverted wave. Below it, scratched in a different hand, in a different era. They sealed it under the water. To stop what we became. You inhale, heart suddenly very aware of itself. You whisper aloud, unsure why. Did it work? The wind doesn't answer. But the water shifts. The tide has turned. And something below the silt just moved. You don't run. You keep going. Because the great flood wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a secret. And it's waiting to be told. The deeper you go, the older everything feels. Not in the way rocks feel old, solid, silent, finished. But in the way a lullaby feels old. Like something once alive, still faintly humming in the cracks. The path beneath your feet begins to slope, tilting gently downward. You run your hand along the wall, carved stone, polished smooth as glass in places. The moisture isn't just from the sea anymore. It's seeping from the rock itself. Like the walls are weeping. You descend into a hallway that shouldn't exist. No records mention it. No maps trace it. Yet here it is, intact, deliberate, inviting. You pass under an archway and pause. Something glints. Embedded in the wall are metallic flecks, not gold, not silver. Something, bluer. They shimmer faintly in the dim light like trapped starlight. You touch one. It doesn't feel like metal. It feels like thought. Some researchers have speculated about ancient materials we no longer possess, or understand. The so-called orichalcum of Atlantis, described by Plato, is often dismissed as legend. Yet ingots resembling it were pulled from a shipwreck off Sicily. High in copper and zinc, yes, but also something else. Something modern metallurgy can't identify. And here it is again, possibly, layered into the walls of a passage no one remembers building. You continue downward. There's no sound except your footsteps and your breath, steady, but not entirely calm. You've crossed a threshold. This is no longer a walk through ruins. It's an encounter. The hallway opens into a chamber. Round. Perfectly round. The ceiling arches like the inside of a dome. You look up and feel your balance tilt slightly. The acoustics are uncanny. Every step you take whispers back to you, 2 seconds delayed. Like time itself needs a moment to echo. In the center of the room, a pedestal. And on it, a tablet. Flat. Obsidian-like. Covered in symbols that seem to shift when you're not looking directly at them. You reach out, pause, then run your fingertips across its surface. It's warm. No one can quite explain why certain megalithic sites, like the hypogeum of House Afflini in Malta, contain chambers tuned to specific frequencies. One room there, the Oracle Chamber, resonates at exactly 111 Hz. Studies suggest this frequency alters consciousness, affects brain activity, even shifts perception. This room feels the same. Not just acoustically. Spiritually. You hear a tone. Soft. Faint. It's not being played. It's remembering itself. You glance down. The tablet glows faintly, symbols pulsing. You're not hallucinating. You're listening. And the voice, if that's what it is, begins to unfold a story. Not in words, but in sensation. You see fire falling from the sky. You feel the ground heat beneath cities of light. You hear voices raised not in fear, but in defiance. This civilization, whatever it was, saw the end coming. And they didn't just run. They sealed something. Some researchers believe the flood myths encode not just survival, but guilt. That we built too much, too fast. That we reached into places we weren't meant to go. Not morally. Mechanically. That we unlocked something. And when it began to speak back, we drowned it. You step away from the tablet. The room is spinning gently. Not physically. Metaphorically. You realize what this chamber is. It's not a tomb. It's a vault. And it was never meant to be opened. The symbols begin to dim. But not before one final image forms, on the wall across from you. A triangle. 3 waves. And below it, a shape. You lean closer. It's not a city. It's a machine. A vast, circular mechanism, gears upon gears, encased in something crystalline. At its center, a sphere. Or perhaps, a seed. And beneath the drawing, a phrase, etched in that same untranslatable script, though this time, your mind bends just enough to almost understand it. One flood ends. Another waits. You feel the cold in your spine before the air changes. A new current. From below. You've gone as deep as the stones remember. And now. Something remembers you. You back away from the glowing wall, careful not to turn your back on it completely. That shape, the machine, or whatever it is, burns into your vision like an afterimage. A ghost behind your eyelids. The longer you try to forget it, the more your mind assembles it in fragments, rotating rings, interlocking teeth, and something spinning in the core, not with speed, but with intention. This wasn't a generator. It was a trigger. The air shifts again. You're used to the silence by now, but this is different. It's not the absence of sound, it's the presence of listening. Something is aware. Maybe has been, ever since you entered this place. You tell yourself that's ridiculous, but the goosebumps threading down your arms disagree. You leave the chamber and move further down the hallway, footsteps echoing softly in the curved stone corridor. The architecture changes subtly. Walls curve inward. Ceilings narrow. Light reflects differently, less like stone, more like metal, or something not yet rediscovered. This place isn't ancient. It's post-forgotten. Some researchers believe remnants of an advanced pre-flood civilization still exist beneath our oceans, buried in the sediment, fossilized beneath tectonic folds, or even sealed in airless chambers like this one. The oceans have only been explored about 5%. That's not a metaphor. That's a threat. And now, here you are, in the middle of something that defies every historical model you've ever learned. You arrive at another threshold. A wide circular doorway. No door. Just the sense that once, it held one. Inside is a domed amphitheater. Rows of curved stone benches rise in tiers. At the center, a pit filled with sand so fine it could be dust. Or ash. You descend the steps slowly, careful not to disturb the air. Along the walls, murals. Not paint. Not carved reliefs. Something in between. Like images burned into the surface by light or heat. Or memory. They move slightly as you approach, flickering like holograms just beyond resolution. In one, you see figures, tall, robed, faceless, raising their hands toward the sky as celestial bodies align above them. In another, a vast wave swallowing pyramids. But not our pyramids. These are older. Built wider. Lower. Meant to withstand water, not time. And in the third, the machine again. Only this time, it's active. A radiant field explodes outward from it, pushing back the wave, freezing it mid-cascade like time itself flinched. Some scholars have long suggested that the ancients were not primitive survivors of the flood, but its engineers. That they didn't merely record the disaster in myth, but created mechanisms to endure it, or to delay the next one. And here's where it gets strange. The murals show the machine being sealed, buried, entombed, by the same figures who activated it. Almost like they regretted it. You descend into the sand pit. Your boots leave barely a trace. This dust is heavy with something intangible. You crouch, touch the surface. The dust trembles. A pulse. Like breath. Like heartbeat. Again. You press your hand deeper, and it gives. You fall. Only a few feet, but enough to remind you gravity doesn't take days off. You land on something hard. You're in a chamber beneath the amphitheater, one not meant to be found. A crawl space. A fault line. The air is stale. Dry. But not dead. Light trickles through from above in soft, dusty rays. And in those beams, the outline of something impossible. Metal. Wires. A mechanism. You crawl toward it. It's embedded into the floor like a fossilized organ, ribbed and interlaced with crystal filaments. You reach out, then stop. It hums. No, not hums. It breathes. This is a remnant of the machine. Maybe not the core, but part of it. A node. A relay. Something that connects to something else. You glance back up through the crack you fell through. This isn't an archaeological site. It's a circuit. Still live. Still listening. You don't touch it again. Not yet. Instead, you sit beside it. Just for a moment. Just to listen. And in the silence, you hear it. Not a voice. Not a sound. But a question. Why do you want to remember? The question isn't threatening. It's honest. You don't answer. Not yet. Because the real question isn't why you remember. It's why we forgot. And that answer might still be waiting, deeper down. You climb back through the cracks slowly, the dust clinging to your hands like it doesn't want to let go. It's strange, being underground, beneath an amphitheater buried by sediment, below a city swallowed by a flood. And yet still feeling like you haven't reached the bottom. You wipe your palms on your thighs and glance around. The murals are still glowing softly, as if the chamber hasn't quite finished speaking. And maybe it hasn't. You walk the circumference one more time, your steps now quieter, more reverent. You're starting to realize that this place wasn't a shelter, it was a memory capsule. Not built for the ones who lived here. Built for you. You return to the hallway and follow its slow decline further, moving beyond even where your thoughts are comfortable going. The light dims, but your eyes adjust. The walls now flicker with tiny insets, tiles or nodes, that hum softly when passed. Like sensors. Like the hall is aware of your presence. You don't ask questions out loud anymore. The answers come unspoken. You reach another doorway. This one does have a door, but it's open, half buried in sediment. You slip past it into a circular room unlike the others. The walls here are covered in diagrams. Constellations. Orbit patterns. Planetary alignments. And across the center of the ceiling, drawn like a scar. A wave. Not artistic. Mathematical. A frequency graph. At the base of the wall is a control panel, or something that looks like one. It's ancient, but not ruined. It was meant to last. A single pedestal stands before it with 3 indentations arranged in a triangle. You stare at them. They're not switches. They're keys. And you realize, this wasn't a vault. This was a command room. Some researchers believe that Atlantis, if it existed, was not a city of marble temples and gold statues, but a functional center. A technology hub. A place where energy, water, and celestial motion were harnessed together in ways we no longer understand. In 2020, satellite scans of the Amazon revealed massive geometric patterns beneath the jungle canopy, grids, roads, even pyramids, so old they predate known Amazonian tribes by thousands of years. When asked who built them, locals simply say, the ones before. You wonder if the ones before ever stood in this room. If they argued. If they panicked. If they voted. Whether to let the machine run. Or to shut it down. Let's be honest, if you were handed the power to stop an extinction-level event, would you use it? Even if it meant erasing everything that came after. You stare at the panel. The triangle N-wave sigil is here again, etched faintly into the edge. But this one has a crack running through it. Like the symbol, failed. Or broke under pressure. You sit on the floor, back against the curved wall. Above you, the ceiling pulses faintly. You imagine the machine below, somewhere deeper, humming, turning, or maybe sleeping. You imagine it hearing you. Or waiting. You close your eyes and try to remember what the mural said without words. A civilization that understood frequencies. That moved water with resonance. That built machines not to dominate, but to synchronize. And when something broke that harmony, the only fix was silence. That's what the flood was. A reset. The ocean wasn't punishment. It was anesthesia. A wave to wipe the signal clean. But something survived. And now, it might be waking up. You glance at the wall again. The frequency graph pulses once. Then again. Not random. A pattern. It's not recording. It's broadcasting. And suddenly, the sound you thought was silence. It's not. It's a voice too low to hear. Too slow to notice. Speaking in wavelengths our ears forgot how to translate. It's been talking this whole time. You just weren't quiet enough to hear it. Until now. You stay seated for a long time. Not because you're tired. Because you've finally realized how loud you've been. All your questions. All your assumptions. The way you've barged through this place like it was a tomb waiting to be opened, when really, it was a whisper trying to be heard. The low hum continues, steady, deliberate, like the heartbeat of something bigger than the earth. It pulses not through the air, but through your bones. Like a memory knocking from the inside. You rise, slowly, and move toward the far end of the control chamber. There, etched into the floor, is something new. A circle, divided into 12 segments. Each one marked not with symbols you recognize, but with celestial positions. Solstices. Equinoxes. Lunar cycles. The mechanics of time, recorded not by clocks, but by sky. You trace the segments with your fingers. And there, at the 9th mark, an indentation shaped like the tip of an arrow. Or a mountain. Or a pyramid. Historians still debate whether ancient civilizations understood celestial mechanics the way we do. The alignment of megalithic structures with solstices, Stonehenge, Chichen Itza, the Great Pyramid, is often explained as coincidence. But you're beginning to see a pattern. These weren't monuments. They were instruments. They marked moments not to worship the stars, but to warn. You place your hand over the 9th segment, and the hum deepens. Behind you, the panel glows faintly again. The triangle with the wave pulses once. Then stops. And then, something shifts. The wall behind the pedestal trembles. Dust falls like snow. A section slides inward with a long, groaning sigh. Another corridor. Darker than the rest. But your feet move before your fear can argue. This is no longer exploration. It's participation. The corridor is narrow, lined with what look like cables or roots, long strands of something metallic, fused with stone. They pulse occasionally, like veins. You brush one, and it tingles. Not unpleasant. Just aware. You reach the end. And the room you enter is not a chamber. It's a cradle. Circular. Lined with panels that rise like petals. Each one curved inward, facing the center. Suspended between them, held by nothing visible, is a sphere. Not large. No more than a meter across. But it rotates gently in the air. And it hums. You stand frozen. Because you don't need anyone to tell you what this is. It's the core. Not of the machine. Of the memory. This is the record. The black box of a civilization that refused to vanish quietly. Some researchers believe ancient temples were designed as data storage, geometry as compression, symbols as algorithms. Stories encoded not in language, but in space, vibration, proportion. The lost science of resonance. And here it is. Floating in front of you, like a single drop of future sealed in the past. You take a step forward. And the hum changes. It's acknowledging you. The panels around the room flicker to life, each displaying a projection. Not holograms. Not light. Moments. A city on the ocean, domes rising like pearls. A tower that touches cloud, not metaphor, but actual structure, glowing with kinetic light. People, not human, but not alien. Just before. Moving in unison. Creating, recording, knowing. Then, darkness. Water. The wave. The silence. And finally, this room. One of the beings places the sphere where it now floats. Then vanishes. And now it's just you. And the hum. You reach out, but don't touch. Not yet. Because you understand. This isn't for you to use. It's for you to carry. Not physically. But in story. In memory. Because the flood didn't erase everything. It left a breadcrumb. And now you've found it. You close your eyes. And for just a moment, you hear them. All of them. The ones before. They're not asking you to rebuild what they had. They're asking you to remember why it was lost. You leave the cradle slowly. Not because you want to, but because you know you must. The hum fades as you step back into the corridor, but it doesn't disappear. It lingers, beneath your skin, like a frequency just below thought. You feel it in your bones, a resonance too soft to be heard, too important to forget. As you retrace your steps through the temple, the air feels warmer, somehow less ancient. Like the place has acknowledged your presence. Or maybe it simply finished showing you what it needed to. You pass the amphitheater again, empty, unchanged, and the murals flicker one last time as if bowing goodbye. Then you see it. Etched just beside the entrance you never noticed before, a single glyph. The triangle. The wave. But beneath it, a spiral. This wasn't just a warning. It was a cycle. Some historians believe Plato's account of Atlantis wasn't fiction, but memory. A story passed through generations, distorted by time, restructured as metaphor. He said Atlantis fell in a single day and night of misfortune. But what if misfortune wasn't random? What if it was a recurring event? A reset. One that happens again and again, not because we don't learn, but because we forget. You emerge from the structure into the open air. Night has deepened. The sky above is crystalline, soaked in stars. And you realize, they haven't moved. Not in all these thousands of years. The constellations watched the floods. They watched the survivors crawl out. They watched this temple sink beneath tides and time. And now they're watching you. You make your way back toward the ridge, the one you first stood on, what feels like days ago. The tide is lower now, and the ocean reflects the stars so clearly it feels like you're walking between two skies. That's when you see it. A shape. Just offshore. Subtle. Massive. Partially submerged. You squint. A structure. Dome-like. Covered in coral and thyme. But unmistakably engineered. And on its face, the same symbol. Triangle. Wave. Spiral. It's everywhere once you know to look. And suddenly, you understand something that no one ever taught you. Atlantis was never a single city. It was a network. A civilization spread across the globe, connected by geometry, resonance, and knowledge we've mistaken for myth. Its remnants are scattered beneath oceans, jungles, deserts, buried not by time, but by intention. To protect something. Or to bury something too dangerous to remain accessible. You take a step toward the water, then stop. You've seen enough, for now. But the real question still burns behind your eyes. Why did they stop? Why, with all their knowledge, their energy, their machines, did they let it all go? Some researchers speculate it wasn't failure, but choice. That they chose to let the flood come. To erase what they'd become. Because they understood something we don't. Progress without balance becomes decay. You turn from the sea and begin walking inland. Behind you, the tide covers the dome again. The sky is quieter now. Or maybe it's you. You feel the story settling inside your chest, not as fact, not as fiction, but as reminder. You don't need to convince anyone of what you've seen. The memory will speak on its own. In dreams. In whispers. In waves. And as you walk into the night, one last thought flickers like a candle behind your eyes. What if the great flood wasn't nature's wrath, but civilization's mercy? You keep walking. The shore fades behind you, but the hum doesn't. It's softer now, more like an echo living in the space between your heartbeats. Like the earth itself is still speaking, just quieter, waiting to see if you're still listening. The path before you twists into stone steps worn smooth by time and water. At their base, a clearing. Circular again. Always circles. Always spirals. You begin to notice them everywhere now. In carvings. In layout. In the very movement of the air through the trees. Not decoration, language. The ancients didn't write like us. They encoded ideas into geometry. Spirals for cycles. Triangles for direction. Waves for change. You think back to the murals, the sphere, the chamber humming beneath the amphitheater. This was never just architecture. It was memory, built into shape. You step into the center of the clearing. The grass here grows oddly short. Not wild. Managed. Like something beneath it is alive, gently discouraging roots. You kneel. Brush the earth. It comes away too easily. A stone slab lies just beneath the surface, smooth, patterned, sealed. On its face, a carving. Not just the wave-and triangle. This time, it's a full scene. A humanoid figure, arms raised. Above it, stars. Beneath it, water. Around it, something serpentine, winding in a double helix. Some researchers believe ancient myths about serpents, like Quetzalcoatl, or the Naga of India, or even the biblical serpent, weren't warnings about evil, but metaphors for knowledge. DNA. Resonance. Energy. The winding path toward understanding. You run your fingers along the serpent's body. It feels warm. The hum grows stronger. You realize, this isn't just another chamber. It's a seal. A lock. And something is inside. No hinges. No handles. Just the weight of time and intent. You sit back on your heels and exhale. What do you do when you find a door that maybe wasn't meant to be opened? What if curiosity was the trigger the last time? Let's be honest, we always want to know. It's what brought you here. It's what brings everyone here. That restless itch under the surface of modern life, the sense that something came before, and it was more. More beautiful. More dangerous. More real. You think of the bones found beneath the floodplains, too large for normal humans, but too familiar to be dismissed. The ones scholars label anomalous. The ones that vanish from museums. The ones with elongated skulls and perfectly drilled holes. Giants, some say. Or survivors of something we weren't supposed to survive. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers teach mankind forbidden arts, metallurgy, astronomy, cosmetics. And when the flood comes, it's not to cleanse sin, it's to destroy the hybrid offspring of knowledge and chaos. Nephilim, they're called. Some researchers believe these were real beings. Not fallen angels, not monsters. Just, the result of someone reaching too far. Of humanity mixing with something more advanced. Or more alien. You stare at the slab. Could that be what lies beneath? Evidence? A body? Or worse, a blueprint? You feel the question tighten in your chest, are you here to remember, or to repeat? The hum is louder now. Constant. Not warning. Not welcoming. Just being. Like it always was. You reach into your pocket and pull out the map, the one you found tangled in the tree roots near the ridge. You hadn't looked at the back before. Now you do. There, faint and smeared by time, is a drawing. The very clearing you're sitting in. The seal. And beneath it, a single phrase, scratched in trembling lines. We buried it in time. Do not unearth the consequence. You blink. Not in fear. In recognition. Because suddenly, the flood makes sense. Not just as an erasure. As a firewall. And this place? It's the password prompt. You rise slowly, brushing dirt from your knees, and step back from the seal. You don't dig. Not tonight. Because remembering is one thing. But waking something? That's another story. You leave the clearing without looking back. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Because for the first time, you understand, some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be preserved, not in museums, not in textbooks, but in memory. In story. In the weight that silence can carry. You follow an overgrown trail, your boots brushing aside vines that seem to recoil slightly, as if they too remember what lies buried. The night air is cooler now, soaked in dew and thought. Up ahead, you see a glint. Something metallic. You approach cautiously. It's a piece of something, no larger than your hand, half embedded in earth. You kneel and brush it free. A fragment. Curved. Polished. Unoxidized. It hums faintly in your palm, just like the walls beneath the amphitheater. Not just a relic. A component. Some researchers believe that ancient civilizations, possibly those destroyed in the flood, possessed machines that harnessed non-conventional energy, piezoelectric vibrations from stone, magnetism from Earth's own field, even sound frequencies. The ancients may not have needed fossil fuels. Their power could have been embedded in place. That idea used to sound absurd. Now, you're holding a whisper of it in your hand. You pocket the fragment. Not to steal, but to remember. To carry forward. The path curves again, leading you to an overlook. From here, the moonlight reveals the landscape below, rolling hills, rivers like silver threads, patches of forest like sleeping thoughts. But what grabs your attention is the outline of a structure. Rectangular. Massive. Almost hidden under centuries of vegetation. You descend. Carefully. The wind picks up as you approach. Not harsh, curious. The building is mostly collapsed, but some of its pillars still stand. Not carved with gods or kings. But with formulas. Lines. Angles. Calculations. You run your hand along one. And feel the pulse again. Subtle. Deliberate. Like a memory encoded in math. This wasn't a temple. It was a lab. Some call these structures teaching temples, especially in Egypt and Mesopotamia, places where initiates learn sacred geometry, star patterns, healing through sound. But this one feels different. There's no altar. No audience space. Only schematics. Plans. Instruments. You find what looks like a basin, not for water, but for light. Its surface is curved like a lens, rimmed with a metal you don't recognize. And at the center, another triangle and-wave sigil. But here, something new. A circle above it, divided in quarters. You trace it slowly. The symbol is ancient. And universal. It means reset. You sit beside the basin and stare at the overgrowth. This wasn't destruction. It was interruption. An intentional pause. Because maybe the knowledge wasn't the danger. Maybe it was how it was used. Let's be honest, we like to think progress is always forward. That each discovery is a gift. But what if progress is neutral, and it's the heart of the civilization that defines what that progress becomes? The flood wasn't punishment. It was intervention. A last breath exhaled to say, try again. But gentler this time. You lean back, letting the moonlight wash over your face. And that's when you see it. In the distance, far past the hills, near the curve of the coastline, tiny flickers. Not stars. Not reflections. Lights. Moving in patterns too deliberate for nature. Geometric. Synchronized. Something beneath the sea is active. Still. Some researchers believe the Bermuda Triangle anomalies are caused by submerged energy sources, machines still emitting fields, long after the civilization that built them vanished. Compass errors. Radar interference. Missing time. What if those stories aren't glitches? What if they're echoes? The lights vanish. The wind settles. And the basin beside you cools. You rise, not with answers, but with awareness. The ancients didn't fail. They retreated. Left pieces behind for those who would listen, not conquer. And now, one of those pieces is you. You walk back through the brush, one hand resting lightly on the artifact in your pocket, the other brushing against vines that seem to shift out of your way with uncanny ease. It's as if the forest has recognized you. As if the earth has registered your presence and remembered. You emerge onto a rocky ridge that slopes down into the valley. And there, half buried in time and lichen, stands a marker. A monolith. You've seen them before, in photos. Remote sites in Siberia, the Mongolian steppe, the Bolivian altiplano. But this one is different. This one knows you're here. It stands 12 feet tall, covered in weathered markings, some so faint they seem like scars rather than carvings. You run your hand across the surface and feel a faint electric prick, like static, only deeper. It's not pain. It's recognition. You step back and look at the base. Another spiral. But within this one, a single dot. A point of origin. This isn't just a symbol. It's a map. Not of land. Of time. You crouch and begin tracing the spirals outward. Every loop is marked by notches, slashes, geometric anomalies. Eclipses. Equinoxes. Flood markers. And at the third ring, circled in faded red pigment, an inscription in that same cryptic script. They built the sky and buried the ground. You don't fully understand it. Not yet. But you feel it crawl under your skin like a truth you've always suspected. This wasn't just a civilization of engineers. It was a civilization of harmonizers. They didn't control nature. They tuned to it. And when the balance was lost, when ambition outpaced awareness, they didn't fight back. They stepped back. Let the water come. Reset the spiral. Some researchers, often dismissed as fringe theorists, believe the Earth's past civilizations weren't wiped out, they simply transitioned. Left behind structures encoded with information, vibration, frequency. They theorize that sites like Göbekli Tepe, Nan Madol, and the Osirian in Egypt are not merely ceremonial centers, but time-locked messages. And what you've just seen confirms it. You rise and turn east. The sun has not yet risen, but the horizon is beginning to glow faintly. There's a feeling in the air, like a page about to turn. You continue walking. And that's when the ground changes. It's no longer stone. It's metal. A wide, circular platform, covered in soil and moss, long mistaken for a hilltop. But it rings softly beneath your step. You kneel. Wipe the earth away. Beneath it, a grid. Fused seams. Geometric joints. Interlocked plates. This was placed here. Not by accident. A buried machine. Dormant. Waiting. In 2002, an underwater anomaly was discovered off the coast of Cuba, a massive, geometric structure with straight lines, sharp angles, and platforms that seemed arranged like a city. Mainstream science dismissed it as a sonar misread. But what if it wasn't? What if that city wasn't a city at all? What if it was a node? A part of the same network you've been tracing? And what if this platform beneath your feet is its twin? You stand at the center. It's faint, but you feel it. A low vibration. Constant. Like something deep beneath the earth is still alive. Still broadcasting. Or worse, still receiving. Let's be honest, we've always assumed ancient people looked to the stars for worship. But maybe they looked up because they were waiting for a reply. You sit. Close your eyes. And listen. The forest quiets. The wind holds its breath. And in that stillness, a question rises, not from the platform, not from the earth, but from you. What happens if we awaken it? And more importantly, what happens if we already have? You open your eyes. The light on the horizon has shifted, pale pink bleeding into amber, the slow undoing of night. But you're not ready for day. Not yet. Not when the ground beneath you still pulses with the memory of something older than sunrises. You stand slowly, stepping off the metal platform. The vibration fades, but doesn't vanish. It remains under the surface, like a held breath. Or like something watching from behind its eyelids. The thought lingers in your mind, what if we already woke it up? You think back to the patterns. The global uptick in magnetic anomalies. The erratic behavior of satellites near the poles. The inexplicable hum reported in regions near ancient ruins, Taos, Auckland, Bristol. No scientific consensus. Just a sound that never stops. And always near sites with flood myths. Always where the spiral symbols linger. Coincidence? Or convergence? Some researchers believe Earth's crust isn't the only thing that shifts in cycles, consciousness does too. Collective forgetting. Global amnesia. Our minds aren't just shaped by what we know, but by what we're allowed to retain. Cataclysms don't just erase cities. They erase meaning. You keep walking, drawn by something you can't explain. Not curiosity. Not fear. Permission. You crest a low ridge, and below you, spread out like a wound carved into the land, is a valley of stones. Not scattered. Arranged. Massive monoliths, some toppled, others still standing tall, like sentinels who refuse to fall asleep with the rest. From above, they form a spiral. Again. At its center, a well. Circular. Deep. You descend into the spiral. No birds. No insects. Just the crunch of your steps and the distant hush of wind through stone. The well has no rope. No bucket. Just darkness. You lean over and look down. There's no water. Only reflection. But it's not your reflection. It's the stars. Perfect. Aligned. Unmoving. You blink. Still there. Some cultures called these sky wells. Mirrors not of water, but of position. Tools for calibrating calendars, charting precession, predicting floods. But what if they weren't just passive? What if they channeled something? You remember the image from the sphere, the one burned into your memory. The machine. The pulses. The seed. And you realize, this well isn't a tool. It's an interface. You reach toward it. Don't touch. Just feel. The air around your fingers tightens. Not wind. Pressure. A bubble of expectation. And then you hear it. That same voice. Slower now. Deeper. Coming not from the well, but from inside it. From below. We remember what you forgot. The words aren't in English. They aren't in any language. But you understand them all the same. You step back. And notice something on the stones around the well. Dozens of handprints. Some small. Some enormous. All facing inward. You kneel. Place your hand over one. A faint light flares beneath your palm. The stones begin to pulse, faintly, like a heartbeat trying to restart. And then. Silence. Because sometimes, the memory isn't ready. Sometimes it needs to know you're listening first. You stand, the light fading beneath your hand, the stone now cold again. You walk out of the spiral slowly, one foot after another, the way you might back away from a sleeping animal you don't want to disturb. And as you reach the edge, something catches your eye. A carving on the final stone. Small. Deliberate. Just 3 symbols. Wave. Triangle. Spiral. But this time, there's something new. A 4th mark. A simple open eye. And beneath it, one sentence etched in barely visible lines. We will not flood again. But we will return. You stare at it until the sun crests the hills. And for the first time, you feel the warmth of morning not as comfort, but as a countdown. The countdown is silent. Not ominous, not ticking, but present. Like the way a storm begins with air pressure before thunder. You leave the valley behind. The spiral, the well, the echo of that voice, we remember what you forgot, it all loops in your mind like a mantra half remembered from a dream. The landscape ahead is unfamiliar again. You thought you had mapped the terrain in your mind, but the more you learn, the more it shifts. You now understand why ancient temples always had labyrinths. Discovery is never a straight line. The trees thicken. Mist clings to their trunks like sleep to a dreamer who refuses to wake. You move slower now, not out of fear but reverence. The air here tastes like secrets that haven't been told in 10,000 years. And then you see it. The final structure. It's not large. It's not grand. It's precise. A stone archway nestled between 2 moss-covered ridges. At its top, one final glyph. The eye. The wave. The triangle. The spiral. And now, a 5th mark. A circle, open on one side. Incomplete. Like a will waiting for its last spoke. You step beneath the arch. And everything changes. The world doesn't shift. You do. Not physically. But attunement. Like you've just been tuned to a different frequency. Ahead of you is a flat platform ringed with 8 low pillars. Each one aligned to a cardinal direction, and the midpoints in between. North. Northeast. East. southeast. And so on. A compass. But not for navigation. For resonance. This was a transmitter. You feel it in the soles of your feet, the gentle vibration of stone beneath stone. The memory of movement. Of activation. The ancients didn't need to send radio waves. They sent geometry. Some researchers have begun to speculate, quietly, cautiously, that megalithic sites across the globe weren't isolated wonders. They were nodes in a planetary grid. Designed not to worship the heavens, but to speak to them. And here's the thing. The grid still exists. The monuments may have crumbled. But the blueprint is intact. Buried beneath cities. Oceans. Airports. Forests. Still humming. Still aligned. Still waiting. You step to the center of the platform. Nothing happens. But you don't expect it to. Because the point of the journey was never activation. It was awareness. To feel the weight of what came before, and the responsibility of what comes next. Because if the ancients chose to vanish, if they built this grid not for domination but for remembrance, then maybe they weren't just preserving their knowledge. Maybe they were testing ours. Would we find it? Would we listen? Would we touch it gently? Or demand answers with force? You look up at the sky. It's the same sky they watched. But now, you see it differently. Not as an expanse. As a mirror. Reflecting a planet full of forgotten songs and sleeping machines and whispered warnings carved into forgotten stone. You step back. The wind carries a single sound through the trees. It's not a word. But you understand it. Remember. Because remembering is how civilizations survive. Not with concrete. But with care. You begin the long walk back. The mist thins. The forest softens. The light shifts. Your footsteps no longer echo. Because now the earth knows your rhythm. And it's walking with you. You find yourself on a quiet path now. The kind where time forgets how to count. Where the wind moves slow, brushing leaves without ever disturbing them. Where your thoughts become weightless, like they've exhaled, finally, after carrying too much for too long. You walk not because there's a destination. But because the earth is still speaking. And now, you're listening. The Great Flood wasn't the end of a story. It was a decision. A deep, ancient silence wrapped in waves, entrusted to time, buried in resonance, carved into stone. And though the cities are gone, and the voices are faint, and the machines sleep deep beneath silt and coral and memory, they left something behind. Not just ruins. But a chance. A chance to remember gently. To rebuild wisely. To be different. So as your body softens into the rhythm of your breath, and the hum of forgotten wisdom settles somewhere beneath your ribs, take a moment to honor the stillness. Not everything must be uncovered tonight. Not every mystery must be solved. Some are better kept in soft shadow, preserved like sacred seeds in the soil of your mind, waiting for the right season to bloom. So let your eyelids drift. Let your thoughts wander. Let the spiral continue turning in your dreams. Because somewhere, beneath the surface of what we call history, something ancient is still humming. Just in case we're ready to listen. Sweet dreams.